Validating and being validated is an important part of any relationship, especially our romantic relationships. Stay tuned for this video, and we are going to talk about how you can be more validating to your partner and why that's so important for building a strong relationship. Any stories shared in this podcast have had names and details changed for the confidentiality of clients. Any resemblance to someone real is coincidental. Hello everybody, thank you for joining us for today's episode. Today we are going to talk some more about validation. In a previous video we talked about why it can be a problem if your therapist is not validating you. And kind of spawning from that in our own conversation, we thought it would be helpful to talk about what validation looks like in a relationship. How do you validate your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend? Because validation is a really important part of good communication in a relationship and avoiding unnecessary contention, I think. And something that comes up a lot when and by a lot I mean pretty much universally, when I have someone who's got problems in a relationship. It's like, we will talk about validation in this session.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things that we see a lot as therapists is that people aren't really sure what validation is. They'll come in and they'll say, well, my spouse argued with me about this and they just weren't validating me. But validating and agreeing are not exactly the same thing. And sometimes I think that we get confused about that. We think that if somebody is validating us, that means they have to agree with us. Mm-hmm. And that's not exactly what that is.
So let me add on to that, because we did talk a little bit about validation in a different form, more like a therapeutic context last time. And if I'm remembering the definition that I pulled out and read, it differentiates from agreeing in that you're acknowledging that you understand how someone else got to where they got, probably in like a thinking pattern or even a behavior. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but you can see how they got there. Validating is just speaking to that. Not agreeing, but validating.
And why do we think this is so important in a relationship?
I sell it to my clients I'm like, look, this is like a cheat code to avoid an unnecessary fight, and you don't have to think of a solution to the problem. Right? You got yourself off the hook. You just got to validate and you're done,
I've not thought of it from that side.
That's probably an oversimplification, but
I actually really like this idea. We should do a whole program of just Jaden's cheat codes for
how to get
we
through
should.
life. I don't know if anyone wants to follow my example in life, but
I think one of the big key pieces to it is that being able to be skilled at validating, it can reduce defensiveness. It's very disarming, because all of a sudden, you get me. It's well, I don't agree, but I do get it. I see how you got there. So I actually think it's your first. It can avoid contention because it's very disarming, and then it feels better. It doesn't make you feel like you're crazy.
I always think of, there's a pretty famous video called "It's Not About the Nail." I'm sure if you search on YouTube, it's the first thing that pops up, but I like to show it to my clients because it's quick and easy, and the gist of it is that the girl in this relationship has a nail sticking out of her forehead, and she's complaining about she's got this ache in her forehead, and her sweaters are snagged, and all these kind of things she's struggling with, and her husband in the video is yeah, you got a nail, and if we just pull it out, you'll feel better. And she's getting frustrated with him, and it just does a really good job of I think explaining what validation is. I don't know if that's the intent when they made it. I don't know what it was made for, but because validation is not about there's the nail in your head and we can pull it out and then you'll not have these problems anymore. That's not validating. Because what validating is saying, yeah, your head probably does hurt, and you probably do have snags in your sweaters, and you can't sleep very well and all these things. And that sucks. I'm sorry that that's what you're going through. Because when we go through a problem in life, there might be a solution to it, but that doesn't mean that all the issues that we deal with in that problem, just don't matter because there's a solution. Does that make sense?
Okay, hold up. So let me throw one small scenario at this. An experience that I went through. I try very much to... this is going to sound terrible. Whatever. When my wife and I have disagreements, or when she talks about things that are frustrating, I do my best to walk her through the other side of things so that so she can acknowledge how people got. One day she was just not having it. I don't blame her. It's less validating that way, right? So she picks up the phone and she calls my younger brother. That's her age. They went to school together. And I'll be danged if it wasn't the perfect response. He just went off on a tangent, blew what she was saying way out of proportion, and she was like, ah, that feels so much better. See, Josh, can you be like that? And I was like, that sucker, right? But that's the concept of validation.
Right. And the whole thing about validation is like the goal of validation isn't to solve the problem. The goal of the validation is to improve your relationship with the person. That's the whole point. That's why you want to validate. Not because you just want to jump in and be a problem solver, but because you value the relationship and you want to be closer to the other person. This, I would say, is like that cheat code, kind of a hack for how do you have more deep and meaningful conversations and relationships in your life. You validate and you get really good at it.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, okay, so we've talked validation, we've defined it, we've talked about why we do it. Now, how do we do it? What are your strategies?
So I like to think about validation as not just being like a set of skills, like a set of things that you say, because sometimes I think people maybe hear a validating statement and then they just repeat it a lot, and that doesn't always work.
That sounds so hard. At some point, that's going to wear out its welcome.
Right, it is. Right? And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the energy that you have when you step into the moment, right? So let's say your wife is coming at you and complaining about something that just happened. Well, if you think about the kind of energy or presence that you have when you step into that space, if you're being validating, that would be gentle, open, and accepting, right? So it's not this judgmental space and it's not hurried. It's something that's just like open, soft. And so even just in your body language, you're communicating, hey, I'm just open to hearing this. This is not stressful for me. I can hold this space for you.
And I think along with that, it's important that that the person knows, like, you're giving them your attention. Like, if Josh is complaining to me and I'm, like, over here, like, picking my fingernails and being like, oh, yeah, that sucks, dude. Like, that's not very validating, right? Because, I mean, maybe saying, like, yeah, that sucks, those words can be somewhat validating. But if I'm, like, preoccupied with something else and not giving my attention to the person, that the act of itself of, like, not caring is invalidating. So give the attention to the person, right? Like, that you're actually interested in this conversation.
Put down the phone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're talking attention and focus on the person. You're talking energy level, which doesn't necessarily need to be their energy level. If somebody comes at you hot-headed, you don't have to be hot-headed back, but maybe being more calm and gentle and perceptive. Is that the word I'm going for? Right? Okay, one thing I want to add to those two ideas, and maybe we throw a third. Sometimes I teach it as like a popcorn concept, right? So if you have a bowl of popcorn that you have popped, at the bottom of the bowl there's always a kernel.
Or lots.
Or lots of kernels, yeah, depending on how you cook it, right? You may not agree with the person's actions, popcorn, but if you can find the kernel of truth that they thought was true that got them to that action, if you can validate the kernel of truth, that can help decrease it too. So if you use the energy level and you validate the kernel, you pay attention and you're focused, I actually think that can be very helpful too.
Yeah, and that acknowledgement that the kernel is there and that it sucks, right? Yeah. Regardless of if you know again, thinking about that nail video, like, yeah, I know that if she pulled the nail out of her head, she would feel better. But if I can cut that out and just focus on the fact that, oh yeah, she probably is very uncomfortable and this probably is painful and whatever it is, like, cut the solution part off and acknowledge that what they're experiencing probably is hard or difficult, and that's what we're validating. Not that there isn't a solution or something, but we're validating that, yes, it is not pleasant, whatever you're going through.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting to say where we see people get caught up in this the most. Like, they have the intention of validating, they're trying to do it, but they're kind of missing. How do people miss when they're trying to validate other people?
The most common thing I see when I talk to couples, I think, is that it's well-intentioned, but the person who's being invalidating really wants to solve the problem, and they feel like that would be the most helpful thing they could do, and they're doing that because they care, right? They care about their partner. And so they do this, like I said, well-intentioned, but it is very invalidating if I come to you and I have a problem and you're like, oh, well, just do this, right? As nice as it might be, I think that that's like the biggest area I see this is, oh no, I'm trying to be helpful. I'm trying to help get them out of this and get them out of this discomfort, when that's kind of the opposite of validating.
Right. When it's just too solution focused.
Yeah.
And again, this brings you back to the intention. Are you trying to build the relationship, or are you just trying to solve the problem? And I'm not saying you can't have some of both in there, but you have to keep clear about what your intention is, because if your intention is to just solve the problem, it could be really invalidating to the other person.
Something I also suggest to clients when we have this conversation falls into this like cheat code category is like, you can be very validating and to the experience, and I always tell them, like, don't take the pressure of solving the problem off of your shoulders, right? You don't need to do that. You just need to listen. You need to validate, and then ask, how can I help you? Because then you're giving them the control of how they want help, right? Because that's validating. It's like, look, I'm willing to help you, but you tell me what will be best in this situation. Because maybe it is like, oh, I just needed to vent. I just needed to listen, and then you can be done.
If that's not the definition of my wife, and I'm like, we're gonna have the same conversation tomorrow, right? Which is not validating. And guess what? We have that conversation the next day, right? One thing I want to add to what Jaden said, just really briefly, and then if you have thoughts, you can certainly throw them out. I think one of the areas that makes validation tricky is that it's tricky. It's a learning process, and so you're gonna feel like you're gonna have the same conversation tomorrow, and you probably will, and that's okay. Like, it takes time to learn the skill set to validate, or for it to feel naturally. I think that's a barrier in becoming a great validator too, because it feels funky.
Well, I think it helps I like what Cher said about building the relationship, and so maybe now I'm kind of thinking if you could even just reframe it as that, right? This is an opportunity to get closer to my partner and to strengthen our connection and the amount of support they feel. Like, if you can reframe it as that, it might be easier to, like, I can ignore the male because this is an opportunity for us to gain closeness and those kind of things.
Right, that is the goal.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I would add to this is, I think a lot of people, when they're trying to learn to be more validating, they don't know what to say. So the other person starts talking, and they can see that the other person's upset, and they can see how to fix the situation, but they're not sure what else to say about it. And I think that it can be hard to learn, like, what kinds of phrases. And I mean, you can look them up. I'm sure we could give you a whole bunch of them. But again, it's not so much the phrase that you say. It's how you say it, and it's your intention. I actually think something that's probably the most validating that we don't really talk about a lot is just asking questions. Just being curious about where the person is at. Why is it like that for you? Tell me more about that. What about this thing? Just so that you're gaining a really good understanding of where they're at. That's way more helpful than a lot of these like statements that you could just give, because those statements may or may not feel like they land with the other person, especially if they don't really feel like you get their scenario. Like, you're just jumping in with oh, that sounds hard, when you don't even really understand what's been going on for them. So just asking curious and open questions can be really validating.
I think that's the superpower. Jaden has it. We talked about that yesterday.
Yeah.
He's got a superpower where he can say anything, and it's just, yeah, Jaden gets me. He speaks my language.
It's true.
I don't know if all my clients feel that way, but I sure hope so. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Hopefully something in today's video was helpful. If you have any questions or thoughts, we'd love to hear them in the comments, and we'll see you on the next video.
Thanks.
Bye.
If you enjoyed today's video, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. We've got other videos for you to check out and more exciting things coming soon. So thank you.